Well, good morning or good evening, depending on what time of day you're watching this. I'd like to welcome to this discussion Charmaine Wood, who is a community caseworker, and Jocelyn Fleet, our nurse educator. And the reason for the discussion this morning is around COVID vaccine. And the reason I've asked Charmaine is that Charmaine has had some experience with the vaccine for COVID within her family that she has agreed to share to give us a sense of the value and the benefit of actually being vaccinated for COVID. So Charmaine, can you just kind of give us a wee bit of the background and your experience as it pertains to this vaccine?
Yeah, I've received my vaccine early March, and it was the Pfizer, of course. And I certainly was willing to take my vaccine, but in the beginning there was sort of that thing in the back of my head: do I want to go first? But that wore off, and I'm quite happy to have received it. I've had I have a family who's not been all 100% vaccine. Certainly some of them hesitant, and I've also had a very close experience with COVID itself, with my daughter becoming ill. She's a healthcare worker in Southern Ontario, a nurse, and she came down with COVID just a few weeks ago, and is better now, but it was a very trying time for my husband and I, 2 weeks when she was pretty sick. And she's only 29, and she had a variant, so it was very scary for her and for us. So yeah, that's my experience with both the vaccine and COVID. And one of the things that I talked to my daughter about was, because she's a nurse, I assumed she was vaccinated, and she wasn't. And I said, were you not offered this vaccine? And she said, well, I was, but I thought I'd wait. Sort of my idea. I didn't want to go first. I thought I'd wait. I wasn't sure. I didn't know if I want to have it. And her and 12 of her colleagues had COVID. They all got it at the same time. And she works in a population of patients that are very much like who we serve here at Anguanata, in a dual diagnosed ward. And many of the individuals on that ward also got the COVID variant. And sadly, one of them is not doing very well. She's in hospital and remains there, and unknown as to how she will come out of this. So Alex, after having this, has a different opinion. And her opinion is more of, I was silly not to think about this. Not silly, but she called herself silly. Not anybody that's thinking of not doing this that way. Certainly not. But she just said it could have prevented a lot of stuff in her eyes. It's probably some guilt she carries, but I tried to talk with her about that. But she feels quite awful about the individual who isn't well yet, because she thinks that that individual wouldn't be in hospital if the COVID hadn't come into the ward via staff. Unfortunately, it came in that way. Yeah,
I think
that's the story.
Yeah. No, well. First of all, thanks for sharing that. And I mean, obviously,
Mhm.
as you say, that has a significant impact on your daughter and on
Mhm.
your family, and obviously
Mhm.
the folks that she was caring for and her colleagues. So now,
Yes,
I mean, in terms of the impact of COVID on her, you said she was quite sick for quite some time.
yes, yes. She was. She started off with a fever. It was Good Friday, actually. She ended up with a fever, and it just spiked. And that was pretty much it for a day. And then, of course, she started feeling a very bad headache. And then, of course, her throat became sore, cough, nasal. She had a lot of stuffiness with nasally. Um, and she seemed like, in the daytime, she was kind of like, oh, I think I'm going to be okay the first 4 or 5 days. And I was a little hopeful that she was just going to have a mild bout of it. And then boy, about a week later, the Friday, she just was flat. I mean, she couldn't get out of bed. She scared me to death. Because she didn't answer phone calls a lot because she was so exhausted. Her partner ended up with COVID as well in the house, but he was not as bad as her, so I was texting with him. And anyway, they were both of them exhausted, fatigued. And Alex told me, said, I work out and I felt like I got hit by a truck. She kept, anytime I spoke with her, she was just devastated with how she just couldn't get herself up the stairs without losing her breath on top of that. Anyway, she had several days like that, and she ended up in the emergency room eventually, and she was frightened because she couldn't breathe. And thankfully, her O2 levels were not low enough for them to intervene at that point, but she had a finger monitor, and they just told her to keep an eye, and they did a chest x-ray, and they did a lot of blood work, and they basically said to come back, basically gave her some ideas about when she needed to come back. So that's when we were very, very scared. I had a pretty sleepless weekend, and so did my husband, not because we couldn't do anything. We're stuck here, 3 hours away from her. There's nothing we could do, and we're just sitting in worry. Anyway, she started to make amends on pretty much day 12. She ended up, her headache left, and she progressively got better after that. And she's actually back to work this week, but it was a very scary time. And I mean, my daughter barely calls me. She calls me a lot, but I mean, she's a very busy girl, but that is whenever she could call us, she was on the phone to her mom and dad. Because she was quite scared as well as we were.
Yeah,
so.
Which is obviously understandable. Now, I mean, and I'm going to just kind of switch over to Jocelyn, because as I understand it, the vaccine, Jocelyn, doesn't stop you from getting COVID, but it significantly reduces the potential impact of the disease. Do you want to just talk a wee bit about that?
Yeah, so what we do know, and I'll just kind of generalize and give numbers that kind of talk to middle ground for all of the different vaccines, but we know that after you receive one dose of your vaccine, it is approximately 50 to 55% effective in reducing symptoms day 7 to 14 after receiving that first dose of your vaccine. And that jumps to almost 80% effective of reducing your symptoms, likelihood of hospitalization after that one dose of vaccine. So there's an 80% reduction in your symptomology after receiving even just one dose of this vaccine. So the likelihood of people having to be hospitalized or experiencing the level of illness that unfortunately your daughter experienced, Charmaine. And first of all, thank you for sharing that. I know that it's a scary situation, so thank you for sharing that. But yeah, the likelihood of hospitalization, severe illness is greatly reduced. People will likely still experience some symptoms, but not to the point where it would be the length of time. They may only have a fever for a couple of days, and the fever may actually only be very, very low grade. The lethargy, they're finding in different studies, they're not experiencing it to the same level. Almost complete coverage to the point where they don't even know that they are unwell because the vaccine is so effective in reducing the symptoms of COVID. And so, yeah, getting the vaccine, it really does benefit persons. And it would be interesting to know how Alex's story would have been if she had, been in the same situation, but had chosen to receive the vaccine.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, I sent out a communication yesterday, basically touching on some of the stuff that you've just referenced, Jocelyn, but also the speed with which the vaccine was developed is another thing that's concerning of people, which is understandable. But based on what I understand, I mean, all of the safety protocols that are normal for a clinical trial or for a vaccine prior to it being actually used were completed. They were just completed kind of like concurrently to end, which prolongs obviously the production piece. So it looks as if, I mean, the vaccine is determined to be safe. The vaccine is determined to be effective at reducing your symptoms and at reducing the opportunity or the possibility of actually ending up in hospital. And I mean, you're right. It would be interesting to see how the vaccine would have played a part if Alex had got the vaccine.
Yeah.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, some of the colleagues that got ill, and basically they went from having zero COVID on the floor to having an outbreak within a week. And some of the colleagues did receive the vaccine. They hadn't had it for a very long time, and they did develop symptoms, but they actually, of what Alex was saying, they progressed a lot better than the ones that didn't. There was a little bit of a test study there, I guess you could say, on Alex's ward.
Right. So I mean, I guess the takeaway from this one, and the reason behind this discussion is to help people who are maybe, sitting on the fence around getting the vaccine, just the benefit that can come from getting the vaccine and the potential impact if people don't get the vaccine. So I think your story, Charmaine, is very much appreciated. And as Jocelyn said, thanks for sharing that. I think it's important for people.
Worries.
And it's important to hear it from somebody who's actually experienced that from, as a family member of someone who has actually got COVID. So, and thank you, Jocelyn, for your input as always. So please, for those folks that are out there, if you are considering getting the vaccine, please, for your own well-being, it's definitely recommended. Thank you.